Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Lee, and I'd like to welcome you to this colloquium sponsored by the Center for Math Science. Better get it right here. Science, Mathematics, and Computer Education in cooperation with the College of Arts and Sciences and the College of Education and Human Sciences. Our guest today is Dr. Edward Prather from the University of Arizona, and there is a reception across the hall in the Heritage Room immediately following this talk. I hope you can drop by and actually get a chance to talk with Ed. I've worked with Ed for many years now on various projects. Let me just mention a couple. This book here is called Lecture Tutorials for Introductory Astronomy. It is probably our main teaching tool in introductory astronomy course here. We have about 600 students right now, and pretty much every class they work through a 10 to 15 minute tutorial through this book in groups. I'd also like to mention his work as part of the Center for Astronomy Education. He's been teaching a series of workshops nationally for faculty who teach introductory astronomy, and they have now pushed about 1,000 teachers through that workshop. So I think that's enough. Let me welcome Ed Prather.
I'm not very good at standing at the podium by the mic, so I'm going to do my best. I just guess I want to find out first. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, so I teach in a classroom about this big, so I'm kind of used to yelling at this level. Well, thanks first for having me out here. As Kevin mentioned, we've been collaborating for a while, and I'm familiar with some of the things that happen on the campus here, but I want to share with you some things that have been happening around the nation. I want to start off by saying I am a faculty member in the Department of Astronomy in Stewart Observatory at the University of Arizona, and I'm the executive director for an organization Kevin talked about called the Center for Astronomy, which is essentially a NASA and NSF-sponsored program to do fundamental research on how people learn within the context of space science. We've worked in astrobiology. I've worked with folks involved in different studies outside of the traditional space science kind of construct. I've worked in some biology classrooms. I've worked in some classrooms looking at plant sciences and different aspects of geosciences. And I want to make the point that what I'm going to talk about today is teaching and learning research on science education that will have the wrapper or context of astronomy as the main storyline that I'm talking about, but overall is true for any of the classes we might teach in the sciences or even outside of the sciences, because the principles are coming from essentially cognitive science and how people learn. So I'll try to bridge the gap wherever I can to things that might be appropriate to other classrooms. But I'm hoping for those of you that aren't teaching introductory astronomy, you're not immediately going to tune out and go, wow, this isn't for me. The things that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to make generalizations that are true of the findings that we've had that would be also true of other disciplines. One of the biggest changes to our group and our research over the last couple of years has been funding from the NSF to create what is known as CATS, the Collaboration for Astronomy Teaching Scholars. And essentially, it was our attempt to get a larger group of people doing research together collaboratively across the country. And so the graphic here is to try to represent that there are now professors and scientists and folks working as instructors in classrooms all over the US who are sharing the data, if you will, from their classrooms together and designing their own research, now in a collaboration with multiple different research strands to solve fundamental problems in teaching and learning. And I'm going to share some of the results of that with you today. I just want to thank the funding agencies. Without the NSF and NASA, I wouldn't be able to do my job, so I want to make sure to throw the slide up there and say thanks, so thanks. I am going to present results from 3 main studies. And I just have to stop by saying I didn't do all this work by myself at all. I work in a collaboration with a lot of different folks. And some of the folks are here at UNL. In fact, Kevin Lee is one of the co-Is of the CATS grant and is really the lead in the arm of our research that is related to teaching with technology and the use of computers and computer-aided learning in the classroom. And I'm sure many of you know of his work here, but I just wanted to make that note that some of what I'll talk about is related to that work. I'm going to try to do a couple things. You guys got some cards in front of you. I'm going to try to make use of those while we're... Anybody not have a card in front of them? Anybody here without a card? There we go. There's one. And if you're sitting by yourself right now, I'd highly advise you to move a couple chairs over, and we'll wait. It'll be okay. Go ahead and stand up and move on over so you're near somebody, because you might need to talk to them soon and collaborate. And I can wait. We'll all wait. If you're by yourself and need to... Okay, I'm trying my hardest, but it might not happen. Okay, anyway, I'm going to try to do some things in this talk that are collaborative, like I might do in my class. I teach classes from 150 to 300, and actually in the spring, our school, for economic reasons, has decided that through the resources on campus, it would be a good idea to convert the Performing Arts Center that seats almost 2,000 students into a classroom and teach them as large classrooms, really large. So I have a 1,000-person classroom in the spring, and the techniques that I'm going to talk about are mainly for use and have been designed and the validation studies done in large lecture classrooms. So I'm going to use a couple techniques along the way in here. One of them will be voting with cards, so we'll get to that in a minute. Another one will be, I'm going to try periodically to emulate a technique I use in my class, which is sometimes referred to as interactive lecturing, where you folks are listening to me babble. I'm going to end up lecturing about not lecturing for a good portion of today. And the irony of that is not lost on me. But in lecture, there are things you can do to keep your audience more interactive. So one of them is sort of a fill in the blank, where you could imagine I'm lecturing about somebody and about some topic, and I really do think that your students in class are sometimes following along and sometimes not. And they need a feedback mechanism to know whether they're on the same page as you, and you need a feedback mechanism to know, are my students really following along? So one of the things that I do in my class is I purposely pause, and I tell my students explicitly, as I'm telling you now, at the beginning of the semester, that I expect them to go ahead and fill in the blank when I pause. And it's remarkable the sensation that happens in your classroom when 300 students all yell out the same answer in unison when you pause. You really do know if they're on board with you, and they know whether they're on board with you at the same time. And it's a little harder to sleep when you're doing this every couple of minutes. So we're going to try this just to kind of warm it up a little bit and make sure that you're ready to go along for the ride. You all live on a planet known as... Okay, we're going to try that again. We're going to make sure everybody's on the same plane. You all live on a planet known as... It orbits the... Which happens to be, in terms of the objects in the universe, the sun is a... Excellent, okay. Over the course of an amount of time well, as the Earth orbits the sun, that amount of time is known as a... Okay, we're doing good so far. That's the idea. I teach the majority of my class using that approach as I lecture. I try not to go more than 1 or 2 sentences before they have to fill in the blank. And that practice makes them come to class and go, I'm a part of this every day. I don't get to not be a part of it. It's awfully hard to be falling asleep when 150 students are yelling out a right answer. I'm going to periodically try to infuse that into this talk today. We'll see if I'm able to or not. I'm not sure how it's going to work out. Yeah?
So in a 15-minute lecture, how many blanks are there?
Oh, easily 40. Easily. And then sometimes the blank is point. Sometimes the nature of the interaction isn't a word but an action. Like imagine that this is the location of the North Star. Everybody point in the direction of north. Now you're not a T-Rex, so your arms are much longer than this. Go ahead, point in the direction of north. Get that arm out there. I can wait. I'm asking for everybody to point north. Everybody. That'd be you too. You can't hide when you're doing this. Everybody sees it. Yep, everybody point north. It's right there. Okay, on the count, no, you're not done yet. Point north. On the count of 3, go ahead, keep your arm up. You're not out of blood yet. On the count of 3, I want you to point south. 1, 2, 3. Now, some of you pointed down, like you have to burrow through the earth. This is an example of how it might also be interactive instead of fill in the blank. Okay, so I'll just start off by saying I'll try to do some of this throughout my lecture. I didn't know we were going to do questions already. Yeah, go ahead.
To fill in these blanks, do the students, have they read something ahead of time?
Not a requirement of my class. Could have been a model that you're using to say, I'm really going to use this fill in the lecture to find out if you did your reading. That would be totally appropriate. In my class, I actually don't have a textbook. They're the authors of their own textbook, and Kevin took it with him, and it's the lecture tutorials book. As I tell them, you're the author of your textbook. So that night before the exam, if you're going to get frustrated with the author of your textbook, it's going to be you. And it's an incomplete book. It's really a list of questions. Whether or not it has the right answers, up to you. And so throughout the semester, you're going to find out if you're a good textbook author or not. Gosh, here we go. Okay, yeah.
So where do they get the answers?
The interactions that they have in class, the questions that they ask of us, whether or not they come to office hours, they're not published. It's on their shoulders. I want to go ahead and move forward to some research. I want to leave time for questions, I really do. All right, so I'm only going to talk about a little bit of the stuff that we've done over the last decade. I'm going to talk about 3 things in particular because they kind of build off of each other for the final thing that I want to make my final point about. And I'm willing to talk about whatever, like those kind of questions along the way, because there's a lot of things that I'm not going to get to talk about. So one of the things, the context of Astro 101, I think is really critical. Now this could have been another introductory science, but Astro 101's special in that we got 250,000 students a year taking that class across the nation. 250,000 people a year taking intro astronomy. Of the US population, 10% of all the college students in the US take intro astronomy as their science course. The other thing that's critical is this may well be their very last science course in life. That's it. We're their last science teachers. They took astronomy because it sounds so cool. They're like, okay, I can take all these. I'm going to take astronomy. So we're lucky in that sense. And I taught physics, introductory physics, for many years. I'm glad to be staying in astronomy because they come to astronomy all happy and bushy-tailed and all like, oh, this is going to be great. they don't know, you're just going to teach them more physics, but it's going to be wrapped in astronomy, and that makes it a little more palatable. Maybe most important, of this population, it's almost exclusively filled with non-science majors. So this is your future business leaders, lawyers, politicians, journalists, historians, and maybe most importantly, as much as 40% of any of those classes, future teachers. So you have a semester or quarter-long, several-week-long professional development for future teachers course, if you choose to put that burden on your shoulders when you teach intro science. And I think that's what we're getting paid for. I think science literacy depends on us, because if you're taking care of the terminal science course in life for that population of people in their terminal science course ever, and you're not practicing the best pedagogical methods possible, what are you doing for a living? That's the burden I think we all have to have on our shoulders if we want a society that becomes scientifically literate, if we want a STEM pipeline that's a little more fulfilled with the kinds of people we want to go in those kind of careers. So I get kind of soapboxy at times. That might be as bad as it gets. We'll see. So I'm going to move on. Again, in many ways, a professional development course for the future teachers and science literacy in America. That's one of the ways we look at this population. So you could look at the context of the classroom, 2,000 years ago, today. Now, I want to make a shift in one of these pictures, and that is the today picture. The large lecture classroom can be very different than we experience as students. It can be highly interactive, and it's hard to see this, but these students are all working in pairs in my classroom. Looks a lot like this classroom in many ways, where they're having discussions about a question that was just put up on the board that they just voted on. And the nature of the discussion is only as good as the richness of the question, the timing of giving it to the students, the context that you've created, and the sense of jeopardy that they have about their answers, and how you've used the pedagogy of voting in the classroom. And we could go into talking about good and bad implementation of voting in the classroom. But heck, it's a good time. Let's warm up the cards. You've all got cards in front of you. To do it correctly, all that I ask is that you vote two ways, simultaneously and anonymously. So simultaneously means do not put your vote up at all until I count to 3. And hold it right here under your shiny little face, right there, right there. That's where you hold it. Not up here, not so anybody else can see it, just right there. I'll be the only one seeing your vote. So we could imagine that the correct answer was A, and I could have had some question up here, and we would have had a discussion or a lecture ahead of time, and I would have posted a multiple choice question. I would have said, okay, let's go ahead and show our answers on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Not everybody's voting A, but most of you are. You can tell everybody the right answer, but lecture's pretty ineffective at delivering right answers, it turns out. So okay, nice job, everybody. So we're going to use that periodically in the talk. I'll see how I can weave it in. In the study, I want to talk about a couple different curriculum. 3 main topic areas that have had a lot of research and curriculum development done. In biology, in chemistry, in geoscience, in astronomy, in physics, all these branches have had people working on different ways of doing questioning in the classroom, class action being one of the kind of premier technology-driven versions of question in the classroom that's being developed here at UNL with Kevin's group. Think, pair, share is sometimes couched in other words. Peer instruction's another word for using student discussions based on questions and feedback. We were just talking about lecture tutorials, which are sort of a longer engagement period of using interactive teaching methods. It could be right down to the interactive lecturing I was talking about earlier, or using demonstrations in more interactive ways that require student predictions. All are ways that you can, in the lecture environment, get students into an intellectually engaged moment where their reasoning is being challenged. One of the things that we often talk about is, and that comes, I think, from a top-down even. If you look at Fortune 500 companies and what they're asking for from college students, I want people that can work in groups and solve complex problems. And you'll often hear people saying, I'm really focusing on critical reasoning or evidence-based reasoning. And these are all vehicles to make all of those things happen. Getting your students to become more metacognitive, getting your students to become more intellectually engaged. And I'm trying not to get into my throw a bunch of education terms around, but literally, what you have them do is more of what matters in the classroom than anything else. And these are all tools to get them doing something and become actively engaged in their learning. So the research I'm going to talk about is really to validate or look at what instructional strategies are having the greatest effect on student learning, and also to talk about are different institutions or class sizes or other characteristics of the student population something we have to be very careful about when trying to do interactive teaching. Is there particular settings for which it's better suited and some for which it shouldn't be used? That's some of the research that we've been doing. And last is we've been trying to create models for which anybody around the country can do fundamental research using the same instructional tools and assessment tools so that nobody feels like they have to go out and create their own, that they're available and they've been research validated, and really it comes down then to implementation at some level. So I'm going to get on to talking about some of this. And the fundamental question is, do these interactive strategies work? Now, I don't know as a population where you guys are all at in the continuum of knowing what research has been done and what validation studies exist in different fields. So let's try it with the A, B, C, D, E questions. Let's let A represent, I'm pretty darn well versed in the nature of science education research about interactive teaching strategies and their effectiveness. B is, I know a little bit, but not much. C is, you should probably talk a little bit about that now. D is, I don't have a pulse. Let's all vote on 3, shall we? If you're voting already, you're already, yeah, okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Interesting. Okay. All right, I'll talk a little bit about it. I was going to skip some slides if need be, but I'll kind of give some examples along the way. And I've just shown you a result of using teaching of voting in the classroom and think, pair, share, where, did I tell you what your results were? The teachable moment is still alive because you don't know the answer yet to what you all just voted. I mean, that's one of the tools, is don't give your students answers right away just because they voted. Hold them wanting for as long as you can. Make them pee their pants to want to know the answer. It's one of the kind of great things about having cards is nobody knows what everybody else just voted yet. Only I do. And it's really valuable to have that kind of tool in place. So the answer is yes, but we can document that interactive learning strategies far exceed the ability of students to gain knowledge beyond just lecture alone, but there are some shortcomings to this general principle or statement. So lecture tutorials, I just want to give you an example. One, they're based on the top topics students or professors cover in a traditional semester. They're designed to be used in this environment with one instructor, maybe a TA, which means they've got to be short in duration. They've got to be pilot tested such that students can solve the problems together, working in a small pairing collaborative group without needing an instructor for every couple students to come and answer questions. It took many years for us to develop a suite of materials that work at this level. The other thing is, they're designed around a learning approach which uses a Socratic dialogue. They are a list of questions. That activity is a list of questions. They might explore a data table. They might explore a graphic or cartoon. They might explore some kind of graph of information or a mathematical scenario or a drawing. But in short, it asks them a very, very entry-level question which elicits their naive ideas. And then it builds with more Socratically difficult questions and more conceptually rich questions that help confront their naive ideas and build more robust models of understanding, which leave them, in the end, with a set of questions that let them demonstrate their newfound understanding on very complex problems at the end of each activity. So I just want to give you an example. In class, you always, using tutorials or even think, pair, share questions, would typically have given a short lecture first, an abbreviated lecture that sets them up to be able to do the tutorial. So an example, these are the topics. Doesn't really matter for this population. An example might be the idea of lookback time in astronomy. The idea that objects in the universe are giving off light. Their light, while traveling at the speed of light, still has to travel across the universe before we can receive it in our telescope. So something might be 7 billion light years away. That means it takes the light how long to get to us from it? 7 billion years. Nice job. Okay, and how far away is that object whose light takes 7 billion years? 7 billion light years away. Okay, excellent. So light year, even though it sounds like an interval of, is actually an interval of, and that's a complication some of you are going to run into as we do this tutorial. So just keep that in mind, okay? I might then go on a couple more statements about, so which of these objects light takes longer, A or B, and you might vote on it. Fundamental idea, just wanting to know, giving feedback to me and to you as to whether or not, and your students are like, yeah, I'll vote on it, I'll vote on anything, I like voting. They get addicted to the idea of responding and voting in class. And so the next thing is you might show them a picture. And we'll just kind of see where your astronomy savvy is as a group. This object, given the kinds of objects, comets, asteroids, moons, galaxies, all those different things in the universe, what kind of object is that? Galaxy. Anybody know the name of that galaxy? Andromeda. Yeah, it is Andromeda Galaxy. Turns out that it's 2.5 million light years from Earth. Okay, that means the light takes 2.5 million years to get to us. That means you're looking at a picture that was actually how it looked 2.5 million years ago. You're looking at its past. Imagine somebody, and I can go on to say, imagine somebody in Andromeda is looking at Earth. The beginning of the lecture tutorial would start here. A simple set of ideas about light travel time and distance away. And it would evolve to more complicated questions, and it would end up, and now I'm just going to show you a question that's out of the tutorial. This isn't a multiple choice question that I'd have them vote on. This is question 8 in the tutorial. My students struggle like mad to try to figure this out. And along the way, they construct timelines and graphical things that they invent to try to make sense of all that information. And along the way, they go, "You're kidding me. So we haven't seen its death, yet it's been dead for over 60 million years, and we're waiting for that event to get to us, and it already has happened." And they're like, "Astronomy is ridiculous." I'm like, "Yeah, wait, it's only going to get worse. We haven't even talked about space-time yet." I mean, the class is just filled with these rich conceptual problems that you can deal with. So is biology, so is geology, so is atmospheric science, so is chemistry, and creating learning environments where they get to struggle with ideas that you already tried to tell them the answer to. You already lectured to them. They might even have filled in the blanks, but their toolkit isn't quite full yet. They're not comfortable with all of the tools that you've tried to hand them in lecture. They need practice. Now, I'm just going to give you some results from research. The studies that we do to try to document success are kind of complicated in carrying out. In this case, it required us to assess all of lecture tutorials over a subset of these topics, required a 68-item set of questions that we created. And out of that 68, as students came in on the first day, they got either Form A or Form B, which each had half of these questions on it. So we got a selection of all of our questions on day one to establish a baseline of pre-test knowledge on day one. Then the complication is you'd like to have several treatment groups. In this case, it's a one-group treatment. They got lecture and they did tutorials. So out of this, which was all done on Scantron forms, after lecture on that particular topic for that day, some of the questions of the 68 that were on that topic were asked of them right after lecture to find out, how are you doing on that question now? Now, the students were never given the questions, the students were never allowed to talk to each other, the students were never shown the answers, and they were given Scantrons every day in class they had to fill out for the answers to these questions. Then we do a tutorial on that same topic and ask the students another set of questions on that same topic to find out how much more do you understand now that you've done a tutorial on the same topic. And I'll just show you the data. Well, actually, I have some questions for you. I don't know, is there a clock somewhere? I don't know where I'm at on time at any. Okay, thanks. So, I don't know, maybe we'll try this with the cards. Do you need more time? All right, let's vote on 3. 1, 2, 3. All of you voting E are wrong. And that's half of you. And yet, you can put your votes down. It doesn't make you, like, broken, okay? It is the most common incorrect answer chosen by my students. Day 1 of class, before I've done anything with them, only 2% choose the right answer. 80% choose that. And it's triggered by a very simple phrase, highest position. You tell me point to the highest position. Done. My reasoning path is over. It's not common to think of things going into the southern sky. That's an astronomical belief that you develop as a result of doing more work. So don't think you're broken. Almost everybody on the planet would point up to that stem. Let's try another one from a different context. Do you need more time? If you need to guess, well, the cards I'm used to are all printed on one piece of paper and you fold. If you need to show all cards at once, you can do that. That's guessing in my class. Something that you can only do, it seems, with cards and can't do with clickers, which I think is fantastic. All right, well, let's go ahead and vote on 3 regardless. You can guess. It's OK. 1, 2, 3. Now, the votes that are choosing choices in the A and B range are probably using a fundamental reasoning tool, blocking. The Earth gets in the way, blocks some of the sun's light, limits the amount that you can see. Very common idea most humans have on the planet about the nature of moon phases. Turns out to be wrong. The right answers are one of these two, and I'm not going to tell you which one because that's my fun. First day of class, only 5% getting the right answer, and about 80% of the students, again, using a fundamental idea we know they struggle with. I show these to you just to show you how we've done research to find out what students struggle with on different topics in astronomy and how to design questions that elicit those naive ideas that are also notoriously hard to overcome. So I'll just show you the results of our study, after lecture. Now again, that's after lecture. That's after our maybe even showing an animation that shows the star's path in the sky. Maybe even using sticks with stars on it, going, here's where they rise, here's where they're high in the sky, here's where they set, what direction, all those different things. Lecture isn't all that powerful at changing an idea that was that robust among so many people in your class. Moon phases do quite a bit better. The lecture is actually pretty helpful. You can actually help quite a few people overcome a shadow way of reasoning and come to a deeper understanding. Still failing, still totally insignificant in terms of success from my way of measuring things. After tutorial. So this is the score after doing the tutorial on the same topic area. Dramatic increase. After tutorial for moon phases, dramatic increase. Overall, over all of the topic areas that we did research on within the tutorial study, this is the result. And the thing I want to point out is day one is just what it is. That's where they were on day one over all the questions of 68 over the entire topic domains that we studied. After just lecture, 2 letter grades. So it suggests, hey, lecture, and if you're doing stats on this, it's statistically robust. It has a large effect size. It is not an insignificant shift in understanding. You could publish on that. Really good lecture. It's failing. It's horribly inefficient or unsatisfying as a science researcher and teacher to say, okay, I got them to failing. 20 minutes on average for a lecture tutorial, 2 more letter grades of gain. So the interesting kind of take home is 2 letter grades that you can't achieve from just lecture alone, can be achieved from a well-structured collaborative learning environment that's going after known difficulties they have. All you have to do is give up a little class time to let them work collaboratively, but not on something that hasn't been structured to help. You couldn't just say, all right, you know what, I've given a lecture, why don't you guys spend 20 minutes and talk amongst yourselves, and over the next 20 minutes, figure out what you do and don't understand about moon phases. Go. Not going to happen. It still could be collaborative. They might still talk to each other, but the nature of the design and structure and the research that went into the activity is the real core of why it's so effective. So I'll just go on to talk about another aspect. We've had focus group interviews, and the students will report in a non-incentive-based focus group interview done by the University Assessment Center that they find the lecture tutorials to be the most effective part of the course. And I love some of the phrases in here, like, why don't all professors use tutorials during class? Think about who's saying that. These folks don't have another science class. So they're saying that about their business class. They're saying that about their economics class or their history class or their whatever other topic. They find it useful to have these kind of collaborative learning environments when it's beneficial. I'll just say that we are addicted to doing research, and for those of you that understand the history of astronomy a little bit, these are the women computers, as they were called in Harvard, studying photographic plates of stars, the old way of gathering research data. This is the analogy to the study I just showed you where we did scantrons, sometimes twice a day, every day in class with hundreds of students. You can imagine if I asked the students, do you like doing scantrons every day in class? Their response is going to be no. So when clickers came available in the classroom, and I got an electronic device to do the same work, I repeated this study using clickers. And here's what we found. Now we'll do a little bit of interactive lecturing again. Are the results identical? Would you say that the results of post-lecture and post-lecture tutorial using clickers is greater or less than it was with scantrons? Greater, yeah. That's almost 10% and 10% for using a technology. Now notice, in this research model, you don't get to give them any credit for doing it. There's no attendance, there's no points, nothing. They just choose to bubble a bubble sheet or click or not. No incentive given. And whether they choose to do it right or wrong, no incentive. So you're hoping that they'll have the kind of ethical standing to just do their best and try. And you never know they will. You give them a new tool, a click instead of a bubble, and suddenly they're doing better. Now, something that's even more amazing to us is we reproduce many of these same studies now using cards in the classroom. So they vote with this instead of clickers. And we're starting to see that maybe even this is lower than it really is. That maybe it's even a little bit better in both categories, especially this one. We will often see votes that look like this in our classroom after lecture to a particular question. I mean, it's like a rainbow, right? There's no particular statistically significant result there. And then after doing the tutorial, it's amazing, and we've taken pictures of our class for questions we know the results to and counted how many of each card choice there are to see. And we're seeing shifts sometimes as high as 15% from what we saw with using clickers or scantrons. So think to yourself about why that might be. Why might it suddenly be better with cards than it even was with clickers? I'll give you the answer we've come up with because I don't have a ton of time to talk about it. But in the end, We think a good part of it has to do with when you're using the cards and your students know you're using the cards. Everybody votes. In my class, if you're not voting, I'm like, I'm sorry, did your card run out of ink? Is it too heavy? You know, I make these kind of sarcastic remarks about it, and then everybody's like, okay, I vote. He can actually see me voting. Holy crap. I'm personally accountable now at a level I haven't been before. The other part is, you know that I know if you got it right or wrong, because I'm looking right at you. And I can say things like, there are 3 of you who got the wrong answer, and the 3 of you know who I just looked at. An amazing social dynamic comes with cards that clickers don't have. If you clicked and a little green light went off above your head that I could see and nobody else, it'd be equivalent. But that isn't happening, and they know it. They know it's anonymous, and they're not being held accountable. There's an accountability factor that comes with this that we're seeing in that result. And it creates a pedagogical improvement in the interaction of voting in the classroom that I will never give up again. It's far superior in that sense, yeah.
The cards, do they buy them at the bookstore?
Hand them out on the first day of class, put a PDF up on my website, and say, if you lose yours, go print your own. Yeah, I mean, heck, for that matter, you could just say, go print it off. You need to have it for class next time, you know.
Don't lose them, or they don't.
They put them in their tutorial book, and I say, you've got to bring your tutorial book every day to class, just leave it in there and bring it every day to class.
Don't forget them.
No, yeah. Okay, so there's just some results to think about. I want to get on to another kind of activity. They're called ranking tasks. I'm going to skip the description and just kind of tell you what it is. They are rankings, putting things in order, greatest to least, hottest to coldest, biggest to smallest. And in short, they are a rule-based assignment where you have to figure out how the ranking happens based on the physical scenario you're shown and the rule that governs how to put them in order. So Kevin's actually working on computer-based ranking tasks right now. I'm going to show you some results from a dissertation that was done by Dave Hudgens with us at the University of Arizona and University of South Africa on creating ranking tasks for astronomy. I'm going to give you a couple to think about first. This would be the kind of scenario you might be given. And there's A through D cases. And you will vote on this. E will be everything's equal in the ranking. There is no difference among the thing I asked you to rank. It's all equal. That will be E. Imagine I asked you to consider these cases and say, for the rocks here on the left, which one is getting pulled on the most, followed by the second most, third most, and fourth most, or are they all equal? For the rocks on the left, which one's getting pulled on the most by its partner rock? I just want you to think about that for a minute. And heck, for the voting, we'll just vote which one did you think was most, instead of all of the rankings. Let's just go with most. And let's vote on 3. 1. Now, if you're already voting, remember, it's simultaneous and anonymous. That way, nobody else can know what your vote is until I count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And you know what? You guys are actually unanimous. Nice work. Not all of you are voting, strangely enough. There's somebody not voting. Do you need cards? I'm actually looking at you while you're looking the other way. Do you need cards? Oh, you did. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't see a vote. Now let's switch the question. Rank the force on these rocks by their partner rock. So rank the force on these rocks as a result of that rock pulling on it. Do you need more time? Okay, let's vote on 3. 1, 2, 3. So many of you changed your vote to a vote which is now wrong. In one context, I can explore your understanding of Newton's laws of gravity and Newton's third law, the force of A on B equal the force of B on A, in the same context. They have a tremendous utility. I could go to different contexts. I could go to the case of astronomical objects and say, rank these based on their size, which is one kind of understanding to have. Or I could say, rank these based on their mass, which elicits a whole different set of tools of understanding in astronomy. Overall, I'm going to try to wrap this up. Ranking tasks were implemented in the same kind of a research model. They were used in class. They were used right after a lecture on that topic. They were used for students to work in a small collaborative group. The design was based on the same idea. They got several ranking tasks on one topic. They worked for a good 15 to 20 minutes in class. We did a research model, which was, let's ask them a suite of questions at the beginning of the semester, after lecture, and after ranking tasks. And the results look like this. Looks a lot like the lecture tutorial study. Same sort of initial beginning around the 30s, after lecture about 61% increase from 30, and then about 2 full letter grades after that from doing another interactive activity in class. So I'm talking about these studies to say there are curriculum that have been developed for use in the large lecture class, whether they be interactive lecture methods and voting with cards, which have been shown to have student improvement, or lecture tutorials, which have been shown to create student improvement beyond lecture, or ranking tasks. They're all tools for the classroom. Now, in our current study, the last thing I want to report on, we did a large-scale study across the nation for 2 years with several Astro 101 classrooms who all were trying to find out which context or classroom environment and combination of tools being used were producing the greatest effects of student learning gains. To do that, we needed a common object that we were going to test everybody with. So just as a quick question, and this could be done with a show of hands, how many of you have heard of concept inventories as a general assessment tool? Okay, a couple of you. So the forced concept inventory, probably not a lot of you. All right. So concept inventories are a suite of questions that are designed as a research tool to be able to do pre and post testing. The key, though, is you're always looking for a topic that is so fundamental to the entire course's instruction that if students can answer these groups of questions relatively well, then the whole course was probably taught relatively well. And so it has to be a central theme. Ours, that I'm going to talk about here, was on the nature of light in astronomy because it governs how we know stars' colors, temperatures, distances away, their motions, and so many topics are all just related to light in astronomy. So a student's understanding of light in astronomy is a pretty good indicator of how they were taught most topics that semester. So we were kind of at a 10-year benchmark. We'd created the curriculum themselves and field tested in the classroom and done validation work to make sure that they worked in particular classrooms for which they were being tested. We had done work to create a concept inventory that could be used in any classroom quickly in a pre-post test format where students are literally only given about 10 minutes to take this test, so professors don't have to give up a lot of time at the beginning and end of the semester. The other step was we've been running the workshops Kevin had talked about. So for 5 years, we've been working with professors in a workshop environment for multiple days on implementation of those strategies so that they could try them out in their classrooms and even come back for another workshop if they wanted more help. And so we had a cadre of professors who were ready to try to do one of these studies with us. So what we got was, I'm sorry, this is just more about the light and spectra concept inventory. We had 4,000 students across the country at 31 different institutions with 36 different instructors in 69 different sections, taught at all types of universities, 2-year colleges, community college, 4-year college, R1s, with classes as small as 8 and as big as 180. And again, these professors typically had been trying some of this stuff out before. So I'm going to show you some of the results of this study. And again, I'm going to try to ask you to interpret things along the way. National, classes from all over the country. Again, they'd been part of a workshop series. So the intent was, you guys have tried this out. We know you're using it. How well is it going for you? It's time to be a scientist again. I'm going to give you some insights into the graph itself first before I ask you to interpret anything. First, the normalized gain is simply the difference between how well they did on the end of the semester versus how well they did at the beginning of the semester, divided by what is known as the normalization factor, or 100% minus their pretest, a scaling factor that says, all right, how well did you do on day 1? How many points are left that you never got? How many of those did you get? So there is no advantage to doing poorly or doing well on day 1. It's been normalized for everybody. The other thing I want to show you is this box. There was a similar study to the one I just talked about done in physics using an inventory called the forced concept inventory done with introductory physics students. And in that study, this is where all of their data ended up. I show you that because this is our data for astronomy. So first question, and by the way, the horizontal axis is their pretest score. So I'll give you a second to look at this. The lines drawn at 0.3 and 0.7 are to divide different levels of gain. This was determined to be the low level of gain, the medium level of gain, and what I call the unobtainium level of gain. There's nobody that seems to break into that range. Does the pretest scores of the physics data all revolve around one score, or is it spread over a wide range? It's not a trick question. We're going to try that again. Are the range of pretest scores for this physics data one score or a range of scores? Range of scores. Would you say the same thing about the astronomy data? No. Yeah, that's an interesting result right off the bat. In fact, one of the things that you notice is there were physics students scoring at 60 and 70% on day 1 on their inventory. That's because physics is a topic many of those students had taken in their high school and prior courses before coming to college. They knew some of this stuff before they came there. Astronomy is different. There aren't a lot of intro astronomy courses in middle school and high school. There aren't a lot of preparation courses for these topics. Now, you might also be thinking that this is guessing, 25%. Everybody's about 25%. Turns out, The individual questions have scores pre-test that range from 8 and 5 and 3%, and some that are 40 and 50%. So the average is 25, not the overall on each question is random at 25. The other thing to notice, and I'll try this interactively, are the gains seen by all of these. Each dot in this represents an individual classroom from a particular type of school, 2-year college or 4-year. So each dot is a classroom. Are all the classrooms achieving the same gain? No, there's a range. Some are in the medium range area and some are in the low. In the Hake data, or the data from physics, I should say, all of the classes down here were taught using lecture-based approaches, and none of the data up here was taught using lecture-based approaches. In other words, only interactive classrooms made it up here in the Hake data, none of the traditional lecture classes. So to take this another level, that's a piece of information we wanted to find out. I'll ask one more. Does there seem to be any population of type of school that predicts whether or not you'll be in this population or this population? I'll try that question again. Out of all the symbols you see representing the different schools, does it appear that any one type of school seems to be better suited to be up here versus down there? Or all at all parts? Okay, you guys aren't jumping on the bandwagon here. Maybe you're just trying to be really good scientists. I hope if you watch for a little while, you'll see there's circles, squares, diamonds, everything here and here. It doesn't matter what kind of school you're at. You might or might not achieve gain. School is not a determining characteristic. I can switch this to class size, where now the data is how big the class is. And I could ask the same question. Does your class size determine whether or not you will achieve gain or not? No. Those two things are the chief complaints that I hear from professors around the country about why they can't do it at their school. You can't do that at my school. My school's too big. My classes are too big. That won't work at my school. Or my class is too small. Or I'm at a community college. Or I'm at an R1 institution. That won't work where I'm at. I beg to differ, and I'm differing with evidence. And I think that's an important leap forward for the nature of the communication that has to happen among teachers and scientists about their teaching and learning. That data should be what we make our decisions off of. So the next level, what we really want to know is what is different about these classes that's making some work and some not. The second step in our study was to ask the professors to fill out a survey that told us how much interactive learning technique stuff are you doing in your class, what types of things are you using, how many hours a week or a day are you using them, so we could calculate a raw percentage of the total semester's time that they used interactively teaching versus lecture, and created what we called the interactive assessment score. So it's just a percent of class time spent interactive teaching. So now I'm going to show you a graph which is the percent of class time taught interactively versus that same gain score. And I'm going to pause to let you look at this for a minute again. I'm even going to draw a couple lines in. I'll draw that 0.3 line in, along with another line. And we believe that this sort of starts to hint to something, which is if you want your class's performance to produce a gain on this instrument that is above the 0.3 line, you're going to have to be at least 25% interactive in class. But just because you're 25% interactive or more provides no insurance that a gain will be achieved. Some of the classes did, some of them didn't. And what was really interesting is, since it's a 2-year study, we have a couple instructors who have a class in here and a class in here. And the direction in time is upward. In other words, they practiced. They got better at implementation and found that their test grade for their class got better the second time they did it, or the third time they did it in some cases. So I'm just bringing up that what we believe this shows is what really determines what's going on here is your implementation. Whether or not you're using that time that you're spending interactive well and really creating an environment for where the students feel compelled to be a part of the interactive learning environment, for which they actually do argue with each other, for which they do participate and try, and for which the feedback they're getting from you and the environment you've created is profitable to them. Those things seem to be the most determining characteristic, not whether they chose think, pair, share, ranking task, or lecture tutorial, but how it was implemented and whether or not it was successful based on that implementation. Because 50% of the class time spent interactively in producing that gain versus that, that's something worth looking at. So ideally, the next step in this study, one of the next steps would be I would love to get 5 days out of the semester's video from all of these classes and be able to analyze those classes' videos and see what are the people doing that are achieving this And what are the people doing that are achieving this in that time that they're spending being interactive? So we might start to find out what are the real juicy implementation tricks and tools and standard practices that some professors are using that others aren't, that might be producing the overall result that we're seeing here. I have one more piece of data I want to show you. This is not yet out in public. We have a submitted paper we're working on right now. One more piece of data, I guess. The average gain of this population is twice the average gain of that population. And in terms of statistics, I'm not about to draw a trend line through all this, okay? So I'm not going to try to go that way. But there is an overall difference that you could argue for. We also, along with the LSCI, this concept inventory, gave a population of those 4,000 students a 15-question demographics study looking at all sorts of different things from level of mathematics preparation, gender, where they were at in their high school career, their GPA, all of those different facets. See, are any of these things indicators of this widespread in gain score? And does it explain the variability amongst all of this data that we have? Are there certain characteristics that are beneficial to B over other ones? And I'll just say that it was statistically significant that males did a little better than females, and this has been shown in other studies also, that students with a greater preparation in college in general, i.e. seniors versus freshmen, did a little better. Students with a little richer math background did a little better. Now, in creating a mathematical model for this, we did what's known as factor analysis or a multivariate regression model. So essentially, there's a dependent variable, gain, and a bunch of independent variables, all the 15 in our study. And you try to look at which coefficients and which variables produce the most predictability and account for the greatest amount of your change in gain. And in looking at that analysis, what we found was if you bundle all of the 15 characteristics here as a model and look at it, they only account for explaining 15% of all of the variability in the gain. Almost none. Only 15%. Which suggests that's not really what shows you what is or isn't working at the highest possible level. You add one variable to that, the interactivity assessment score from the classroom, it explains a 30% increase in understanding why this is happening. So that one variable, interactivity, is the most significant variable out of all things we've studied so far. But the other thing it shows is that even including interactivity, which also the data is really kind of cool in that it shows that interactivity coupled with all the other variables helps everybody. Interactivity helps men and women equally. Interactivity helps low GPA students and high GPA students equally. Interactivity helps all variables equally. So that was kind of cool. So that's finding one, is that interactivity has a positive effect on learning, and it has a positive effect on every demographic group. Independent of all other variables, you can look at them individually, and it helps everybody. So sometimes people will say, hey, I'm not really sure this is going to help the good students. This is going to hurt the good students, isn't it, doing all this interactive stuff? They really don't need this. Wrong. It helped them as much as, and not more than, the students who have a lower GPA or fewer science courses in the past or less math preparation. It helps everybody equally. But the one thing it still leaves open is if you've only explained about 30% of what's going on with all of those gain scores, what's the unstudied variable? You've looked at all the demographics of the students. You try to look at interactivity in the classroom, but the one variable you haven't examined is the faculty, the instructors. That's really the hidden variable. And what we have decided that we're going to continue to do and try to make even more a case for is more professional development. That it really comes down to how do you understand the population you're working with. They're non-science majors. Have you changed the way in which you teach this population from how you teach other populations? What level of mathematics are you expecting them to be capable of doing when they're being asked to reason critically about these phenomenon? What are you aware of in terms of tools that are available to you, from interactive lecturing and voting with cards or tutorials or ranking tasks, or whatever your field has developed for its environment? How familiar are you with the nature of implementing it? How much have you gone down the road of developing your pedagogical content knowledge, your knowledge of the population, your knowledge of the curriculum, and your knowledge of how to implement it given the complex nature of your classroom? That's what we think is the most important variable that explains why some classrooms work and some don't. That's actually the last slide of my talk, so I'll just stop there and whatever questions you might have.